This is what the food industry is doing, lying and twisting on a constant basis. If somebody is overweight, if they have type 2 diabetes, it's not their fault. It isn't, but only they can fix it. If you do this one thing, you can change your entire life.
I recently discovered that over half the people who regularly listen to this show still haven't hit subscribe. So let me ask you this. If you're looking for conversations that challenge your thinking, help you to rise above the noise, and give you the tools to live more freely, then please hit that subscribe button. We're on a mission to reach over 50,000 subscribers so we can get these bold, uncensored conversations in front of the people who need them most. And here's my commitment to you. Every single week, I'll show up with the most courageous guests, the deepest insights, and the truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. This is more than a podcast, it's a movement. So if you're with us, subscribe now and let's build something that truly matters. Welcome to the Dan Astin-Gregory Podcast, the place to be to live free and prosper in a world gone mad. From challenging the official narratives during the pandemic to helping to build a global freedom movement, this show is your front line for bold conversations and the tools to thrive. And today's conversation might just change how you think about food forever. What if I told you that most of what we've been taught about food is wrong? That the way we eat today isn't just making us tired, foggy, or overweight, it's slowly killing us. Today's guest is Edmeades, the founder of WildFit and a leading voice in ancestral health, who's helped thousands of people around the world to transform their health by returning to the way we were meant to eat. In this conversation, we dive into the foods that humans are truly designed to eat and how ancient wisdom may hold the key to our modern health crisis. We cover how most diets fail, how the food industry is hijacking your instincts, the power of seasonal eating and fasting, and how to break free from food dependency without relying on willpower alone. If you've ever felt confused, fatigued, or frustrated by modern health advice, then this conversation is for you. But before we get started, if you're someone who's starting to question the system, the media, or the mainstream narratives, then join us at the Thinking Society for our free live webinar and our upcoming course to help you to reclaim your mind in a world of manipulation. Head over to weareelevate.org/Thinking Society to find out how to join us. Eric, I'm really delighted to have you back here on the Dan Astin-Gregory Podcast. We've been exploring a number of topics recently, how we can increase our health and our longevity. But I think we've taken people on a bit of a path of confusion because there's so much conflicting advice and ideas around how we can optimize our diet. But a lot of people have been asking us to talk about the ancestral diet and whether it's still relevant today in today's modern lifestyles. You know, did the hunter-gatherers who had to pursue their own food, is that relevant to those of us who are much more sedentary today? So I'm delighted to have you here with us to explore this. But I'd love to hear your definition of what we mean when we talk about ancestral diets. What are people actually talking about when we reference an ancestral diet? What does that mean to you in the context of your work?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's only more relevant in the context of modern civilization because now we have to apply consciousness to, gain benefit from it, whereas our ancestors didn't have to think about it, right? It was simply their environment and it was their way of life. So it's even more relevant now as a educational topic and as a space of consciousness for, optimizing your life. The way I look at the ancestral diet movement is that it really comes in two flavors. It comes in a surface flavor, which is often the convenient flavor, and then it comes in a deeply rooted scientific flavor. And so what I mean by that is that in the surface view of it, you'll find somebody who will tap into an aspect of ancestral living and they'll go, wow, that aspect really, really works. And so that aspect must be true all the time. And so then they latch onto that one thing and become an extremist about that one principle. And then equally, when another principle comes along that violates the same theory, like say evolution or biology, but they find it inconvenient, then they'll just factor that into their diet anyway. So I'll give you an example from my perspective is the carnivore diet, which incidentally I'm a big fan of in a limited way. And what I mean is that there's absolutely no question in my mind that periods of time on a meat-only program can be very, very useful for most people and certainly certain people. But what I've noticed is that in the influencer world, you've got these, people who jump in with the carnivore diet and suddenly they're talking about, well, the real benefit of having milk and raw milk and what have you. Now, again, if I was forced with a gun to my head to drink milk from another mammal, and then I would rather take raw than pasteurized. But I would want to first fall back to evolutionary biology. The purpose of an ancestral diet is to mimic as closely as possible your evolved relationship with food. I mean, that's what it's about. And as milk is a brand new addition to the human food, this is people wanting that because it's convenient for them. It violates the principle that they're using to argue one aspect of their diet, but it's okay because it's convenient for them. And that's what I mean by that surface level.
Great. Thank you for that, Eric. And I think that's really important. So I'm intrigued by this point of the evolved way when we look at the ancestral diet, because one of the things I'm curious about when I think about the ancestral diet, there's certain factions within the kind of food community are kind of looking to identify what early hunter-gatherers would have eaten. And I'm just curious in your perspective about how relevant the specific early forms of diet are to our modern lifestyle. Was that ancestral eating a pattern based on survival and availability? They didn't have any modern science to tell you, was it optimal for your health? And I'm not sure whether modern science does that anyway, but we can get into that later. So how does what the hunter-gatherers were eating, ad infinitum time into the history versus where we've evolved as a species? How do we get that connection between original diet?
Let's start with the benefit of modern science. There's no question that we have learned things and that we can optimize things, and we've developed technologies and knowledge that can optimize our human experience. We've also developed things that are absolutely destructive to the human experience. So, there's some consciousness needed there. But here's one great sort of metaphor for this, that if you look at the 100-meter dash over the last 100 years, so, athletes have been training, preparing. They've been using increasingly modern techniques for their training, new running shoes, new running surfaces, new oxygen measurement and training technologies, new understandings of supplementation and nutrition. There's been unbelievable advancements in athleticism over the last 100 years. So would you like to guess how much time we've shaved off the 100-meter dash in that same 100 years?
I couldn't tell you. I bet it's significant.
It's under a second.
What?
Under a second.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. It's an infinitesimally small change. Now, of course, the 100-meter dash is a short time, and somebody could come along and go, well, look how much we've improved on the marathon. Yeah, that's 4 hours of running or 3 hours of running, or depending on your athletic level. But the point being is that in that measurement of the 100-meter dash, the vast majority of your success in that area is going to come down to your genetics and your natural lifestyle. That is that you're training and you're eating well and so on. And then, yeah, you can optimize a little with better running shoes and some biohacking here and there, supplementation. But so the first thing I would suggest to people is that the one danger of the current sort of influencer market and biohacking market and what have you is that because it can be so amazing, people tend to use it as a shortcut. They're like, well, I'm having this problem, so I'll just take this pill or I'll use this technology to solve the problem, rather than recognizing that the optimal path to that might be, a natural solution. As an example, you're in the UK?
Yep. So
I don't know if you know this, but on a lot of the rest of the planet, there's this big orange glowing thing in the sky, and it pours warmth down. You might remember about three years ago on a Thursday in London, they had that. But I'm only making this joke as I lived there for 10 years, right? But the fact is that you're living in a place where vitamin D is a difficult thing to manufacture because you don't get enough sun exposure. And so, of course, the biohacking world is going to come along and say, well, I mean, that's really simple. You're going to get yourself a red light therapy. You're going to take some vitamin D supplementation, and you can certainly do that. But you, in my opinion, should not be doing that in replacement of seeking out natural sunlight. When I lived in the UK, I owned a convertible, and you don't need a convertible when you live in Dubai. In fact, if you have a convertible in Dubai, it's just ego. If you have a convertible in England, it's like should be prescribed by your doctor, because when the sun does come out, you need to get it on your skin. Yep. Right. So that's kind of my thought on the sort of technological side of it, is that we got to be careful that use the technology wisely, but not in replacement of what's real. And so here's my thought process on ancestral diets. The issue here is that humans, like all other living organisms, have, over the balance of phenomenal amounts of time, evolved to survive the environment that they were living in. And that meant the food availability, the food cycles, the water availability, the necessary level of movement, and the necessary level of sunlight, and all of those things. They evolved to survive and utilize the very best of their environment. Now, when you take an animal out of its environment and you put it into another environment, well, often that goes quite badly for them because they weren't evolved for that environment. And what we did, really in a number of different levels, but let's say even if we just look at the start of agriculture, is we changed our environment so significantly that there were health consequences. In fact, it killed a lot of people. And slowly we start trying to, evolve to catch up with that. But what most people don't understand is evolution. Sure, you can, there's moderate evolutionary change over a 10,000 year period, but it is not significant. I mean, as an example, milk was introduced into human consumption probably less than 10,000 years ago, roughly speaking. In fact, speaking of the UK, I believe that one of the earliest examples of milk proteins discovered on pottery was discovered by Paul Evershed at the University of Liverpool. And it shows, human use of milk, say 6,000, 7,000 years ago, something like that. In that window of time, say 10,000 years, we needed to get past lactose. It was a problem for us because humans can't do that. We produce lactase when we're babies to break down the lactose in the milk we're drinking. And then when we stop drinking that milk, we stop producing lactase. And then when we drink milk, we are, quote, lactose intolerant. Being lactose intolerant means being Homo sapien. Now, some people in that 10,000 year window have evolved a slight modification. I believe it's on chromosome 2, and it allows you to continue to produce lactase, which lets you process the lactose into adulthood. And in 10,000 years, here's where we've arrived. The vast majority of people on this planet are still lactose intolerant. Some Caucasians are not, but huge numbers of us still are. And almost all non-Caucasians are lactose intolerant. And many people will say, yeah, but look at those people in Scandinavia, they're drinking all this milk. Okay. Go to Finland right now. It's not far for you. And get to Helsinki, go into a nice restaurant and order anything that has dairy products in it. And then you say, oh, excuse me, I'm allergic to milk. And they go, don't worry, it's all lactose free. Because they remove the lactose from all their cream products, all their cheese products, because guess what? It hurts people. And so if in 10,000 years, we still don't even have the majority of us that can process lactose, which is only the first gate you have to get through to make milk into a food, then no. This is a roundabout way of saying that your evolutionary biology was dictated by the environment and our evolutionary response to that environment. Now that we are no longer in that environment, if you want an optimal health plan, what you need to do is learn from that juxtaposition, learn from that contrast, and take the very best we can from an ancestral lifestyle and combine it with the very highest level of consciousness about modern technology. And then you can create phenomenal things.
Wow, fascinating. So with that evolutionary process, you've illustrated how long it takes for humans to adapt to that changing environment. I think most of us would agree that the environment has shifted more rapidly than ever in human history in the last 100 years, the last 5 years, the last year, particularly technologically speaking. And with how different modern life is now, to what extent do we still need to be looking to the past? I mean, do we first need to look
more so?
Right.
More than ever, we need to be looking to the past because, okay, here's maybe a better way of describing this. I want you to imagine 3 populations of elephants, okay? One group of elephants is living in the Kruger National Park in South Africa. And in that Kruger National Park, they are dealing with the realities of lions and hyenas, which will hunt their babies. They're dealing with other elephant herds that they have to compete with. They're dealing with environmental conditions and brush fires, and which can be incredibly dangerous. They're dealing with poachers as well, and so that's their life. It's an incredibly hard life in the Kruger National Park. Now you have another population of elephants, and they're living in a slavery forest camp in Thailand, where they are trained with hooks and hit and beaten, and they work all day carrying lumber around and what have you. It's a horrible environment for them. And then you have another group of elephants that are living in a really nice zoo that protects them. They have no predators, no competition, no poachers. They even have health insurance. I mean, they're all good. So which population lives the longest?
The one in the wild, in its native
Absolutely.
environment.
Absolutely. They live the longest. Then which one lives the next longest? The ones in the slave camp. The ones that live the shortest are the ones that are living with modern comfort. They live the shortest lifestyles because they are most removed from their environment. And the zoos that do the best job of mimicking their environment as closely as possible create the best possible outcomes for those elephants. So arguably, Chobe National Park, Kruger National Park, the Serengeti National Park, the Ngorongoro National Park, arguably, those are large zoos. And they mimic as closely as possible the original environment of elephants. And so despite the fact they have to defend themselves from elephants and poachers, they live longer in that environment they do in the safety of modern civilization. Now, I don't think that's exactly true for humans anymore, because humans have become so weakened by technology and weakened by civilization that if I were to take the average person and try to stick them in the bush with, say, the Hadzabe bush people, hunter-gatherers in East Africa, most people wouldn't last the afternoon. But that said, if most people integrated aspects of their lives into their lives, they would dramatically increase their health. For example, if they moved as much as the Hadza move, if they ate the way the Hadza ate, if they created their family structures the way the Hadza did, if they learned from those things, they would be living in a much tighter accordance to what their DNA developed for. And I'll give you a really tangible example. The Hadzabe people have the same neurotransmitters that you do. They have serotonin and dopamine, just like you and me. And their serotonin and dopamine are triggered by very similar things to you and me. But in their environment, every single thing that triggers serotonin, dopamine, and positive neurotransmitter responses for them, in other words, rewards, every single thing they do to get these biochemical rewards is functional. When they spot tracks on the ground, they get dopamine. When they follow those tracks and the tracks get fresher, they get more. When they see the animal that they're hunting, they get more. When they pull back the arrow and they go to shoot and it hits the mark, they get more. And every one of those steps increase their odds of survival and procreation. Equally, they spotted a bush with a bunch of berries on it. They get dopamine and serotonin. They eat some of those berries. They get dopamine and serotonin because it's helping them survive. You and I scroll our phones to get dopamine. We use recreational drugs. We watch excessive amounts of television, and we do a suite of things on a daily basis that give us those same reward chemicals, only the things we do are going to lead to cancer, heart disease, depression, suicide, and like. So if we don't bring our consciousness to bear to examine the gap between our ancestral or our, let's say, our evolutionary reality and our modern life, well, then terrible things are going to happen. And some of the terrible things that are going to happen are going to be exactly the ones I described. 1 in 3 people to cancer, 1 in 3 people to heart disease. The third most common killer in the civilized world is iatrogenic death, which means death by the medical industry itself. And if you weren't sick, you wouldn't have been there in the first place. Like, we are dying of civilization.
If what Eric's sharing is hitting home for you and you're ready to break free from the modern food trap, then check out the WildFit program. It's helped thousands of people around the world to reset their relationship with food without dieting, calorie counting, or relying on willpower alone. This isn't a fad, it's a return to how we were biologically designed to eat and live. And I've known Eric for over a decade now, and there's no one I trust more when it comes to health. So head to danastingregory.com/wildfit to learn more about the WildFit Food Freedom Experience. Now back to the conversation with Eric.
So yeah, we need to be paying attention to our original design. We need to escape the zoo and do what we can to bring as much of nature to us as we can, as most of us are not prepared to go live in nature.
Right. I mean, that story perfectly illustrates how environment is such a strong determinant of our health. I mean, as you were speaking, and I was pondering this in prep for our discussion today about when I was thinking about the ancestral diet and how much choice was made by survival and availability versus optimal choices. And I kind of pondered my own choices, and I realized I tend to eat whatever's in the house. So it's still availability and survival. If I'm out in the street and, donut catches my eye, I'm not someone who eats donuts, but I can see why in that environment, some people might choose to eat the snack. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I succumb to some of these whims and desires as much as anyone else. But it showed me how much the environment is key, but also still in terms of availability and survival being primary determinants if we don't make conscious choices in the modern world to look beyond that. So
let me give you a great example, Dan. So we all know that we're supposed to be exercising, and we know that we're supposed to go out there and work our muscles and get our cardiovascular fitness and work on our flexibility. We kind of know that, but there's the old Chinese expression, to know and not to do is not to know. So I would argue most people don't know that. They theorize it. But here's the thing. One of the reasons that we don't do it is we don't have to. I mean, that's why we don't do it. We don't have to. Humans, by our very nature, are instinctually lazy. We are energy conservationists. And by the way, men more than women are like this. Women are quite good at pottering around and maintaining movement and doing all kinds of things. Watch, and this is stereotypical, of course, and not right in every case. But you look in a family, if a man turns on the TV, he sits down and watches the TV. Women will often turn on the TV and then do stuff. It's baffling to many men that it's like that. But that's an evolutionary throwback. Women were responsible largely for the home environment. And that meant keeping the area clean of snakes and collecting and foraging foods and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the men were responsible for security and hunting. It was a different energy tasking. But what's fascinating is if you look at movement maps of, say, the Hadzabe people, a traditional hunter-gatherer population in East Africa, you'll find that the men and the women do roughly the same distance every day. But when they've been geo-tracked, what they found is that the women do all of their tracks within the confines of the camp, unless they're migrating, because they do migrate several times a year. But the men, their movement patterns look like a big giant star of outward bound journeys and back, outward bound journeys and back. They're doing the same number of steps. They're just doing different activities. In other words, movement was absolutely necessary to us. Now, we're told today you got to go and do your exercise because you want to keep your muscles, or because you want to burn the excess calories because of the damn donut that you ate. But there's another entire thing that people don't understand mostly, is that the lymphatic system, which is a major component of our immune response. It's the preventative version. It's cleansing you all the time. Your lymph flows around your system to clean your cells. That's the purpose of it. But unlike the cardiovascular system, which is urgent and important, the lymphatic system is not urgent. It's only important. So we did not evolve a pump for that. Cardiovascular, we have a diaphragm to pump the air in and out. We have a heart to pump the blood all around. You have, your body is physically taking charge of that, so that even while you're sleeping, your blood is circulating. But lymphatic fluid isn't like that. It never needed that, because the amount of movement that we committed on any given day was sufficient to move the lymphatic fluid around the body. Your muscular contraction and relaxation pumps the lymph around. And so there was no need to evolve a pump, because we were the pump. Now, today, we have Uber, elevators, escalators, walking sidewalks. We have couches, we have cars, we have long haul flights. We do not move a fraction of what used to be required on a daily basis. And now we are barely moving lymphatic fluid around us. And we wonder why there's so much illness. Well, I would guess that that's one of the factors.
Yeah, well, so this kind of line of thinking, Eric, is kind of why I was posturing this conversation around the original diet, because I'm thinking, would it be better to study a sedentary creature like an elephant? Because, almost we've become so, this is going to sound horrible.
Sedentary? Dan, sedentary? Elephants eat 23 hours of the day.
Okay.
They move constantly.
You'll have to pick me a different animal.
Sedentary.
You're the evolutionary guy. But I suppose I'm pointing. Yeah, I'd have to look beyond. Humans are the best example of a sedentary animal now.
Yeah. Humans and Netflix are the best example of sedentary.
So maybe a cow. Or, I don't know, but I suppose you get my point. When we look to the requirements of that hunter-gatherer that walked out into the plains and all that movement, and we're not doing that anymore. So surely now, I read about how little a whale, despite its size, actually consumes. And I'm thinking, do we radically need to shift our calorific intake because of how still we are? I mean,
All right. I would say this, that there does need to be, there should be to some degree a relationship between our, food intake and the level of burn, and that would be both energetic burn and non-nutritional burn. In other words, the more exercise you're doing, the more protein you're going to integrate into your muscles and so on. So yes, of course, there are some soft modifications to your diet relative to your level of activity. If you're heavily training and you're weightlifting every single day, your appetite's going to go up, and it would behoove you to eat more protein, but it wouldn't change what you eat. And it wouldn't change that substantially how much you eat say it wouldn't change as substantially as say, well, I'm moving like an elephant now, I'm going to eat like an elephant. You don't want to do that. An elephant eats 200 kilograms, 200 kilograms of grass, bark, and seasonally available fruits every single day. And it eats for about 23 hours a day. But by the way, it has 6 sets of teeth. They grow 6 sets of teeth in their lifespan, because eating grass is unbelievably challenging. It's hard on teeth like crazy. So they have 6 sets of teeth, so that as their teeth wear away, they grow out that next set. We are clearly not like that. I'm sure there's things that we can learn from the animal kingdom that can certainly help us to optimize things. But I would suggest, if you want to make comparisons to the animal kingdom, what you might want to do is look at chimpanzees, bonobos, other primates that have a lifestyle that is much more similar to what our ancestral lifestyle was. And I think that things could be learned there.
I was expecting you just to say, Dan, just move more. Don't lower your nutritional requirements to suit the sedentary lifestyle. Start living in accordance with how humans were designed. That for me feels like, if you
mimic to some degree an ancestral lifestyle, you activate certain bodily functions that are necessary. So here's a great example. Your ancestors had to live through seasonal fluctuation in nature. That's just the reality of things right now. So every animal, let's say, evolves a different metabolic response, and that metabolic response has to do with the food availability and level of movement and so forth in the environment that it lived in. So if you are a crocodile, say a Nile crocodile, and it's migration, and you take down a big buffalo or you take down a big wildebeest, you might not need to eat for another year. Like they can quite literally go upwards of a year without eating. That's the metabolism that they evolved. They don't control their own temperatures like we do. They're cold-blooded, so they don't waste all this energy on that. And so they can eat once a year on a big meal. We can't do that. It doesn't matter how sedentary. You want to talk about sedentary? Go with the crocodile. Incredibly sedentary. But it doesn't matter how sedentary you get. You can't get away with eating once a year, right? Now, another version would be, let's take a look at, say, bears in, say, Mendocino County, California. In the fall, there are berries on the bushes everywhere. They're eating those berries. Those berries are giving them low-grade insulin sensitivity and causing them to gain weight and significantly spiking their appetite, so that they eat more berries and salmon so that they can fatten up, so that they can survive the winter hibernation season, right? That's what they evolved. Wait a second. What do you think would happen if we took those bears and trapped them in fall, in Mendocino autumn, for like 4 years? So now they go into autumn, then they have their hibernation season, they burn through all the fat that they saved, and then the spring comes along, and then they go through the cycle again. But let's say we take that bear and trap them right there in autumn for years to come. What do you think would happen?
Overweight, diabetes, all of the usual things that would happen if you eat too much.
That's amazing. That's totally amazing that's what would happen. So when we recognize that what we've done is changed our food supply and changed our environment so significantly that almost all of the pain and suffering that humans are dealing with today are because effectively of evolutionary mismatch theory or nature withdrawal syndrome. So again, it's not that I'm advocating that everybody sell all their shit and go and live in the woods. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if you begin to realize that we have the requirement for sunlight, then maybe you'll stop being indoors all the time and you'll get the sunlight that you need. Or in your case, you'll get a travel agent. You'll go find some. Here's another great example, again, related to these seasons. Your and my ancestors had to survive basically 3 seasons, because summer and autumn aren't so different from a metabolic perspective. But we had to survive these 3 seasons. The toughest of the seasons for us to survive was winter. That was awful. We're talking drought. We're not talking like, Scotland or Minnetonka. We're talking like sub-Saharan Africa. It was awful. Drought, the hunting is bad, the plants are gone, heavy calorie restriction. So first thing is our ancestors had to evolve the ability to survive that. Well, we did that by developing a very interesting response to carbohydrate foods because they happened to be available right before the winter. What's the response we created? Well, the response is that carbohydrates make us hungry in order to fatten up for the winter. Carbohydrates eaten in excess cause insulin sensitivity problems, which means that we don't burn it as well, and we end up storing a lot of it. It just like it basically drives you to fatten up for the winter. That was the response. But then also our bodies evolve the ability to utilize winter, not just to survive it, but to utilize it. Now what happens is you go into winter and you face massive calorie restriction. Well, the first problem is your body goes, holy crap, there's no food around. Maybe I should burn some of this fat that I stored up. And the body's like, no, this is our emergency fat. We're not letting go of that. What can we burn in the meantime? And so the body starts scanning itself, looking for protein to burn. And the body's unbelievably intelligent. It doesn't burn out healthy protein. It burns out broken proteins, broken amino acid chains, collagens, old dead cells, and what have you. It burns them out, and that cleanses you. And so our bodies utilize winter. So by the time, if you were lucky enough to survive winter, by the time you came out of it, you were unbelievably cleansed, and you've just dramatically reduced your odds of developing cancer and a variety of other diseases. Problem today is that Mother Nature doesn't control your fasting cycle anymore. Mother Nature used to force you to go on a fast. So you did, and you cleansed. Now, for you to go on a fast would require like willpower. You would have to make the decision to go on a fast to avoid convenient and available foods. And if you chose not to do that and not to run these cleansing cycles, then I think the consequences would be a huge uptick in cancer. And of course, that's one of the things we're seeing as a symptom of modern living.
What's an appropriate kind of fasting cycle then for the modern human in the context of that? We're not necessarily going to starve ourselves for the winter because of the same premise, but
so fasting, it's a very, again, once something seems to work, it becomes a baby bathwater situation where it's like all or nothing. And it becomes the big trend. Oh my gosh, you're sick. You're carrying too much weight. Then you should just go on a big 40-day water fast. I mean, no. What I would suggest is that, and there's very good science on this, by the way, because political prisoners over the years have undertaken hunger fasts under medical supervision in prison systems, right? So that means that they can actually watch what happens to their body and see what's going on. And the truth is that you can actually live a phenomenal amount of time without food. The first phase of that isn't even damaging to you. In fact, arguably, it's good for you. Then it can start becoming severe malnutrition and become a problem. But that could be weeks into it before that really happens. So in essence, what goes on is you go into a fast, and initially your body has a bit of a meltdown about that. And it says, hey, listen, why are you not eating? You got to go find food. And so you'll find yourself feeling very hungry. And if you go into the fast, having been eating a lot of carbs, you might have withdrawal symptoms from the sugar. You might have headaches. So fasting can be the onboarding of fasting can be very difficult if you don't understand the onboarding protocols very well. So now at some point in that, first 2 days, your body is going to say, well, I'm not getting any dietary sugar. So I'm going to have to take a look at burning fat, and you might trigger a ketogenic response. But on the third day, or after say 48 hours, your body goes, wait a minute, I don't want to burn fat. I don't want to burn fat because God knows how long this is going to last, and we should hold on to this fat just in case. And it's at that point that the body starts burning proteins, and that cleansing process is really like, that's what we need. That I would argue that regular fasting might be the single best anti-cancer protocol that anybody could undertake. My personal habit is about once a month, I do a 3-day water fast.
Amazing. I mean, as you were speaking, I was thinking at least if I could do a week-long fast or a 5-day fast in the winter, to kind of coincide with those seasonal habits that may have predated my modern existence, that would be interesting. But I think the regularity, again, syncing with the historic patterns may be very interesting to observe. What's been the impact of you taking that regular fast?
It's been phenomenal. I mean, look, I've been health focused since I was 21 years old, and I've been researching these things since then. And yeah, I've spent 15 years visiting hunter-gatherer tribes to try to, really look at the difference between ancestral and modern living and all this kind of stuff. And I've made a number of really great modifications to my diet over the years. I switched to ancestral based thinking about food about a year and a half before the paleo diet book was published. So it's like way back before it was a thing. And the initial focus and still very much the focus in, say, the paleo movement is what to eat. So it's what to eat from a Paleolithic perspective. One of the biggest upgrades that I created in my life and in the life of hundreds of thousands of people around the world at this stage is that you also should be looking at when to eat from a Paleolithic perspective, not just what to eat. So there's a concept that we talk about in WildFit called ancestral food patterns. And ancestral food patterns govern everything from the timing of your daily meals to how you drink water to how fast you eat to what your seasonal cycling is, to recognize that you do need to go into ketosis from time to time, but you should also go into this, this fasted state to cleanse out your body. So, the practical reality is that let's say you wanted to duplicate as closely as possible an ancestral way of doing this. Well, that would mean living in a winter calorie restricted state for months at a time, which would frankly be unbelievably unpleasant. It just wouldn't be practical, and it wouldn't be enjoyable. And it would be particularly tough because unlike for our ancestors where there was no food, you didn't have to deal with daily temptation. Whereas for us, there's constant convenience, right? My view is that undertaking fasts like that on a semi-regular basis allow you to trigger that cleansing process. My general prescription to people is that they do a 4 or 5 day fast once a quarter, or like I do a 3 to 4 day fast once a month. I think either of those things is going to be fantastic. But if people aren't up for that, then I would just suggest at least once a year, do to 3 or 4 days, just once a year if that's all you can manage. Here's the good news is that once you understand how to go into one and how to come out of one, they get easier every single time they do it. Like it gets easier and easier. Right now, like if you were to talk to my partner, if you talk to Kirsty, she would say to you, like, Eric's just the greatest faster. And here's her measurement. I don't get grumpy. I don't lose my energy. I go to the gym. Even though I'm fasting, my life doesn't change a great deal. I don't sleep very much, but that makes me more productive. I can tell you when I first started fasting, it was day 1 was terrible. Day 2 was terrible. Day 3, I would feel some relief and feel fantastic. Now I just switch into that fasted mode super quickly. And this is one of the aspects of what we might refer to as metabolic flexibility, that your body can switch metabolic modes very quickly. The more often you do that, the better your body gets at doing it.
Thank you, Eric. I'm glad you mentioned your journey from when you were 21 on this. I'd like to talk a little bit about that in a moment in terms of what inspired you to look at this, because as we said in the introduction, you're not just learning this stuff, you've lived and breathed it for all of your adult life, and you're not just talking about the hunter-gatherer tribes from a textbook. You've spent time living alongside them, studying them, to develop this holistic understanding of the ancestral way, which has informed the work with WildFit and the books that you've put together. So just very briefly, tell us a little bit about what was the inspiring moment for you that made you think I have to look differently in my own health choices.
It starts off with the recognition that chronic pain fades away, and you just get used to it. And so many people are living with a base level of suffering that they've somewhat become unaware of. And that's where I was. At 21 years old, I had a number of quite, painful and difficult symptomologies that I was dealing with, ranging from chronic sinus infections to seriously chronic throat infections, cystic acne, horrible allergies, environmental allergies, and debilitating digestive problems. And this just was my life. And it so became my life that I didn't even think of it as suffering. It was just me. That's just the way I was living. And, a buddy of mine, Tim, convinced me to go and see Tony Robbins. And I went to go see Tony Robbins in 1991. I'd listened to a bunch of his this is a dating statement, but I listened to a bunch of his cassette tapes. Let me explain what cassette tapes are for. I'm kidding. But, I went to go and I listened to him on cassette tape. So I was sort of familiar with him generally, but then I went to go to one of his programs, and he spoke a lot about food in one of the programs, which I was kind of confused by because I thought we were there to learn about communication, psychology, selling, that kind of stuff. But he got me thinking. He said some things I'd never thought about before. And I went home and I thought a lot about that. And I started, reading some stuff about it. And I decided to do a little limited experiment with food. And in 30 days, I lost 35 pounds. I breathed through my sinuses for the first time in almost a decade. My throat infections completely went away. My doctor had already ordered surgery for me to get my tonsils taken out of my throat. And they never had to be removed. And my face completely cleared up and the digestive problems completely went away. I mean, gone. It was like a miracle. Now, bear in mind, I come from a medical family. My medical relatives have had all kinds of opinions about what I could do to get better. And I went to go see many doctors, and I was prescribed pills, injections, inhalants, everything, creams and what have you for my face. I mean, everything. And none of those things did anything except temporary relief from some symptoms. And all of a sudden they were all gone. Like gone. And again, remember, when you're living with that suffering on a day-by-day basis, you don't really think of it as suffering. You just think of it as a way of being. You numb to it. But when it lifts, you begin to realize how heavy it really was. You begin to realize how much pain and suffering you really were in. And that is the moment right there. It wasn't, it wasn't the changes I made. It was the results I got. And suddenly I became deeply impassioned. It's like, oh my God, because of course I began to realize that so many other people were living this way. They were living with low-grade pain. You'd be amazed, Dan. I mean, there are people who are taking headache pills every week, a couple times a week. There are people that are taking antacids all the time. In fact, they now have pre-antacids that you can eat before the meal so that you don't there are people taking these things, decongestants. There are people on decongestants all the time. Those things are largely unnecessary if you pay attention to your evolutionary biology. Our average client reports a $500 a year reduction in over-the-counter drug use.
Wow. That's how to take down Big Pharma. Yeah. I mean, your story, Eric, is so similar. As you were speaking, I was like, oh my God, if we put a checklist side by side, that was from age 15 to 25, what you described. I also was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 21. I made some pivotal choices after that and largely had a very healthy 30s. But weirdly, when I turned 40, I've had a really stop-start to my health, and I'm racking my brains to see what's changed in my own life. We won't segue into that diagnosis, but what I was doing in my 30s was working, and something slipped because...
Okay, no. Let's do segue into that for a moment. Here's all I'm going to say is that evolution is very much on your side to get you to and through breeding cycles. So that's why, people are unbelievably resilient as children. Their bones are bendy. You can drop them. Kids are super robust and what have you. And have you ever noticed, I mean, very often younger people can just eat whatever they want. They don't put on a huge amount of weight. Of course, we're now pushing the limits of that even. But I mean, when we were growing up in the 70s, we were eating at McDonald's. We were eating junk food all the time. It was very rare for somebody to actually become overweight at that stage, because when you're young, there's a very high degree of resilience. And then as you become older, the body generally becomes less forgiving about that because you're not as important to the breeding cycle. So it's almost like the body's like, well, now it's up to you. And so it happens to men and women. You cross 40 and you suddenly have to be paying more attention. There's no question about it. I mean, you think it's been tough for you, and maybe it has, but go and talk to some of the women that have crossed that 40 barrier and ask them about what's going on with their hormones and weight control and so on. It's really challenging. And part of the problem is that if your body is really forgiving about your diet in your 20s, and then you cross into your 30s, and then all of a sudden you're eating the same way you were, but you now have a different metabolism. You have a conservationist metabolism rather than a young, like going out there and moving all the time metabolism. And that turns into a bunch of problems.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I must, struck a chord. I mean, I know people are going to be screaming now at the screen going, okay, just tell me what I need to eat. What does I'm screaming that. I'm like, what do I need to do? What does our biology tell us about what we should eat? Our evolutionary biology, everything from our teeth, our gut, our intestines, our metabolism. Because this one of my vegan friends, was his counter rebuttal to the episode we did on carnivore. The carnivore diet was, he was critiquing the teeth, our molars, etc., and how our body doesn't appear to be 100% geared to eat meat all the time. Like if we had to go and kill an animal and eat it raw now, we'd probably die. What does the evolutionary biology tell us about what food we should be eating?
Okay, I'm going to be initially gentle about this. We have thousands and thousands of vegetarians and vegans that go through our WildFit programs, and we support them in their decision to do that, but we're honest with them about it. It's not right. If you're going to make that decision, you are going to have to supplement, because you are eliminating a massive, massive source of ancestral nutrition. You're going to have to supplement. There's no question about that. Even the American Vegetarian Society has it right on their website. Should you choose this lifestyle, you will need to supplement for the following things. Like there's never, Dan, ever in the history of Earth been a successful multi-generational civilization of vegetarians and vegans ever. It's never happened. The closest experiment we have to that going on right now is in India, which has some of the most prolific obesity and diabetes, let's call it diabesity, as Mark Hyman would say, problems ever. And by the way, do you know where they don't have that in India? Along the coast. Along the coasts of India, they don't have that same explosion of obesity and diabetes. They don't have that. You know why? Because they're not vegetarians and vegans along the coast. So I want to be. Let's approach this from the perspective that you said before. First of all, that these days there's a lot of confusion, right? One person comes on and talks about carnivore, and they have great arguments for why that's a great idea, and then somebody else comes along and talks about veganism, and they have great arguments, and so on. The thing that we all have to understand is that the food industry wants cognitive dissonance. They want you to be confused, because the more confused you are, the more you will surrender to their marketing and simply eat what they put in front of you, because you are in the zoo being fed by the zookeeper. Done.
A quick break to tell you about the Thinking Society. This new 6-week workshop series will help you to sharpen your critical thinking, spot manipulation in real time, and break down the narratives without breaking down your relationships. You'll learn directly from an incredible faculty, and together they'll equip you with the tools to think clearly in a world that is increasingly disconnected from reality, and engage in courageous conversations that matter. Register now for our free workshop at weareelevate.org/Thinking Society, or click the link in the episode.
Once you recognize that cognitive dissonance is their goal, you'll begin to understand why there is so much conflicting information, why the Daily Mail in your country, one of the most read publications in the world, publishes 2 articles 1 year apart from each other, one stating that eggs can be protective against blood sugar disorders and diabetes and what have you, and the other one saying that eating eggs appears to demonstrate an uptick in the likelihood of developing type 2 diabetes. Now, hold on. These are 2 very conflicting ideas in the same publication. But what the food industry understands is that most people get their nutritional information from fads, Instagram followers, and headlines. They don't read food studies, and they don't even know how. So I did it. I decided I'd read the food study that said that eggs cause diabetes. And I can tell you the short version of this is that what really the study showed is that some women experienced a slight uptick in blood sugar after eating egg products, and they took that and turned it into eggs cause diabetes as a headline. But if you go even further into the study, what you'll find is that the women in the study, it was a study in China, largely did not enjoy the consumption of eggs in baked or boiled or poached or fried fashion, and they ate their eggs in the form of baked goods, such as muffins, waffles, and cookies. And then you wonder how they got an uptick in sugar. So this is what the food industry is doing, lying and twisting on a constant basis. So let's look at the evolutionary biology. There is no mystery about the human diet if you don't want there to be. There isn't a mystery. Here are the places we can check it against. First of all, the caves in southern Africa along the whole southern coast from Cape Town around the corner. Those caves were excavated, and people have been living in those caves consistently for 200,000 years. Consider that you come to North America and somebody says to you, oh, I've got an old house because I live in Eastern Canada or Eastern America. Oh, really? How old is your old house? It's like 90 years old. And you're laughing. You're like, that's a brand new development in Shropshire. Like, what do you mean 90 years old? We just built that. We have houses here that are 400 years old. Meanwhile, the people in Croatia are going, you guys, what are you talking? We have houses here that are 1,000 years old. And then you go to Egypt, we're going, well, we built these 5,000 years ago. Those all sound like big numbers to us when you consider them against the idea that people have been living in these caves for 200,000 years. It makes the pyramids a blink ago, whether or not aliens built them, but it makes them a blink in time ago. Now, in those caves, they've excavated down into the caves, because when people live in caves, they just litter. It's called litter. And the cave floor rises slowly over the centuries. So they cut down in the caves and then they put glass. So you can go and look to see exactly what people have eaten for the last 200,000 years. Our ancestors, what they ate for 200,000 years. There is no mystery about that. But in case the mystery still survives at that stage, we could then go and look at modern hunter-gatherers. And I don't mean the ones from South America. They are this is politically charged to say, but they're not actually indigenous people. They are immigrants to South America. There are no indigenous humans to the Americas. And the only place that humans are indigenous is Africa. And so if you go and look at the last remaining hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa, you will find that they eat precisely the same thing that is in the 200,000 years of cave dwelling. They eat the same things. And then if that's not convincing enough for you, we could then go and look at our closest living relatives on this planet, which would be chimpanzees and bonobos, one of which we share more DNA with than the other one does. And we could look at their diet. And what we would find is they eat exactly the same things as what was being eaten in those caves for 200,000 years in slightly different macros because they're forest dwellers, but they eat the same foods, just slightly different seasons. It is absolutely consistent. Our ancestors evolved on a diet of seasonally available fruits and vegetables, meats, fishes, eggs, poultry, maybe some nuts and seeds and honey. And that's it. There it is. That's it. Now, I'm not saying you can't eat other things, and I'm not saying that every plant is good, and I'm not saying that every animal is good, but that is the core thing. That is the core fundamental nutritional profile of our species and of chimpanzees and of bonobos and of our ancestors and of our hunter-gatherer, friends today.
Yeah, I mean, you set that up for a big reveal, and I think that's very clear when you look back over the examples you've given, that those are the foods that we're supposed to be eating. And obviously we can't go back 200,000 years to look at people's psychology at that point, but I wonder how not only modern food advertising, corrupt big industries, etc., have actually distorted us from our natural instincts. And I do wonder, whether the hunter-gatherers would instinctually know what types of food would provide the best response.
Here's a tricky thing. I want to go back for 1 second and talk about teeth. Okay, so what the vegetarians, the ideological ones, not but there are some ideologies. You know the old expression, how can you tell if somebody's a vegan? You don't have to. They'll tell you. When somebody is very politically motivated, then they will often get into the teeth conversation. And what they'll do is they'll show you, say, for example, a chimpanzee's teeth, and they'll show that they have these big, these things. See, they eat meat. They've got these things. Those have nothing to do with eating meat. By the way, gorillas are herbivorous, and they have much bigger teeth than the chimpanzees do. Why? Because those teeth are about fighting. Those teeth have nothing to do with meat eating. They have to do with fighting. We are very good at clipping, chewing, pulling meat out, and grinding. We have a full set of teeth, and our teeth look unbelievably similar to chimpanzees, unbelievably similar. Yes, they have these bigger canines. They fight. That's what they're there for. But the rest of their teeth structure is very, very similar to ours. So I want to make the point that when people use this teeth thing, they're usually basing that argument. Well, they are basing that argument on a logical fallacy. So with that, the industry, the food industry, in some cases knowingly, in some cases for them a happy accident, are directly manipulating our instincts and directly manipulating our biochemistry. So here's an example. Go to the grocery store. For you, it's, Sainsbury's or what have you. And you're going to pass through Tesco's, and you're going to get to the checkout counter. And what is there? What are you going to have to walk through to pay for your food?
I mean,
you have no choice.
Just mindless amounts of it's just endless rows of like cereal, sweets.
No, and I'm not even talking about that. We'll get to that. I'm talking at the cash register. You're trying to leave now. You've got the food. You've been so disciplined. Now you're at the cash register. You have to wait there. You have to stand there and wait. What are you waiting in?
Yeah, it's just like wall-to-wall snacks. It's
all the candies. And what colors are they?
Brightly
What
colored.
Color is the packaging?
Yeah, brightly colored to get your attention.
Fruit colored.
Yeah. Wow.
It's directly designed to trigger you that these are in season now. Look, for our ancestors, the minute those brightly colored things started showing up, they wanted them immediately. They were the difference of surviving the winter. So powerful cravings come up. You eat one, you want two. You eat two, you want five. The food industry completely understands this. So they primary color brand all these sweets at the register. You're walking out, your DNA goes, oh, look, fruit's in season. Oh my God, it's been a year. It has not been a year. You were here last week. But they're here. They're playing directly to our instincts. Now, whether they know they're doing that or they just did a bunch of split testing and figured out that's what sold, I don't care. The net result is the same. Now, let's talk about biochemical manipulation. Sugar has the function of triggering appetite. It's meant to be that way. And the reason it's meant to be that way is that, again, the fall is coming. The fruits are on the trees, and you and I are out for a walk, say 20,000 years ago. We walk around and we see the fruit there. We eat a few, but our stomach is normally about the size of our fist, so we don't eat that many. But as we walk away from the bush, we end up with a huge amount of insulin production, which brings our blood sugar crashing down, and now we get hungry again. This is the normal cycle. I turn to you or you turn to me and go, hey, you want to go back and get some more? And so we go back and get some more. Then we start eating sufficiently that we're getting this big dopamine serotonin rush, and we start producing endorphins. Endorphins are painkillers. The reason that we have those endorphins is so that we can stretch our stomach for feasting and not hurt ourselves. And by the way, most of us have had the experience that somebody breaks out a watermelon or some fruit that you really like, and you eat it too much and too fast. And then after, your stomach starts to hurt. That's because the endorphins have worn off. The endorphins kicked in to allow you to fill your stomach like that. But, then later your stomach hurts. And by then the consequence is far enough away that you don't learn the lesson. So we are designed to get hungry when we eat sugar. Well, listen, if you and I are food scientists and we're trying to figure out how to sell more of our food, we know damn well, put sugar in it. You're going to make some super delicious, old style heirloom vegetable organic tomato sauce for people at their house. Yeah, let's do it. But let's make sure that sugar is the number 2 ingredient, because then they'll eat twice as much.
It's wild, which points back to why the science was hijacked in the 60s or whenever it was around fats and sugars.
Exactly.
So, I'm a big advocate for personal responsibility, but you can kind of understand why people are struggling, not firstly because of all this crazy, lots of different ideas about what is right and wrong, but secondly, and more importantly, this bombardment of food advertising and, manipulation of the food pyramid. The food pyramid does not represent the food types you've just outlined from the evolutionary perspective. It just doesn't. It doesn't mirror up. At least not.
Dan, if your friend has a dog and the dog is fat, is it the dog's fault?
Right.
It's not. It's not the dog's fault. And I want to put to you that people today are overweight, and we're not allowed to call them. I saw this thing in the UK the other day that there's some guideline in the NHS that you're no longer allowed to inform people that they're obese. They're just, gravitationally challenged or something. I don't know what the new technology is, right? But we're supposed to avoid offending them. And I'm like, you know what? I'd rather my doctor risked offending me. I'd rather my doctor said, dude, you're fat. You got to do something about it. But at the same time, I also appreciate that we don't want to be shaming people necessarily. We want to be educating them. And so what I would say about this is that you're when you say that there's a personal responsibility aspect to it, that would be fair if the food industry had not hijacked all of the marketing campaigns, they had not done all the lobbying to affect the food regulations. The woman who designed the food pyramid, handed it over to the US government. The US government took something like 15 years to publish the damn thing, and they only did that after running it through the food lobby. And so by the time they published it, it was literally upside down from what she created. And she said in the 70s, if you publish this, you will cause a pandemic of obesity and diabetes like nothing we've ever seen. I wonder if that happened. It was already happening by the 80s. That's how fast it started happening. So when you recognize that the food industry has, in the most unconscionable and unethical way, manipulated our laws, our food regulation, our food education, and our food supply itself, no, it is not a matter of personal responsibility, except that it needs to become one. I would say this, that if somebody is overweight, if they have type 2 diabetes, it's not their fault. It isn't, but only they can fix it. And that's the difficulty. They're going to have to fight against the food industry. They're going to have to learn new psychology. They're not going to do it going on a diet, because the diet industry is no more ethical than the food industry. The diet industry says, starve yourself and then you lose the weight. Well, that's a complete misunderstanding of biology, because when you starve yourself, your body becomes conservationist and doesn't want to release the weight. You just get hungry and then you binge. The average person gains 3 pounds every time they go on a diet. That's why, which is super great for the diet industry, because the diet industry is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, benefiting from their own failure. Hey, how about this, Dan? We call obesity and type 2 diabetes lifestyle diseases, right? We call them lifestyle diseases because they're your fault, of course. So where does that come from? I'm going to put to you that started with the tobacco industry. And the tobacco industry discovered or realized by the 70s that they were in some deep trouble under product liability laws. They were going to face massive lawsuits from people that had died from their products and what have you. And so they had to start figuring out how to deal with that. So they recognized that when they go to trial, they're going to need to, have a strategy here, and they're going to want to use basically an affirmative defense. It's not our fault. They did it themselves. They did it to themselves. So in order to do that, and they were very successful at this, by the way, the first big lawsuits that came out, they won them. They somehow won them. Like, people were coughing up pieces of their lungs and dying and losing relatives, and yet the tobacco industries were winning. Here's why they were winning. There are 2 ways to tamper with a jury. One is totally against the law, and they probably did some of that. But the bigger one is not against the law. It's pretty expensive. It's tough to do, but nothing illegal about it. The against the law version is you find out who the jurors are, you go to their house, you bribe them, you blackmail them, you extort them, clearly against the law. And again, I'm not saying that happened. I'm not suggesting that the tobacco industry did those things, but what I'm saying is they, in my opinion, definitely did the second one. The second one is to taint the entire jury pool before they become a member of the jury. And you do that by impregnating an idea into society called lifestyle disease. You start referring to lung cancer as a lifestyle disease. Now people going, oh God, yeah, it's a lifestyle disease. Well, you're suing the tobacco company? But it is a lifestyle disease after all. And so now you're sitting on the jury, and the court, the lawyers, the 56 lawyers that are representing the tobacco company against you, they keep making reference to this. Well, we understand that our products are far from ideal and certainly can cause some health challenges, but at the end of the day, this is a lifestyle disease. I mean, you made the decision to keep, and Jesus, it worked. They actually won. Now, by the 90s, that misconception or that hypnotism that they put into society started to fail, and they started losing suits like crazy. And they were getting judgments in the hundreds of millions of dollars against them. So they needed to divest to some degree from smoking. And so they started buying food companies, and they started buying into the food industry and using the same manipulative tendencies, make the products addictive, manipulate the food supply, lie about the dangers of them, and make sure that everybody understands that obesity and heart disease and diabetes are lifestyle diseases.
Damn. And why am I not at all surprised in any way? But I mean, this is a cycle that will probably never end in terms of the ethical responsibility of major industry. So in light of that, if individuals and society as a whole, which represents, the totality of the individuals that it contains, if we fail as a society at this point in our evolution to start to change what's going to happen? What are the consequences?
It's happening.
We ain't going to evolutionary adapt to this madness.
No. Evolution is, there's a bunch of reasons that we will not evolve a response to this. We can't. And it requires a little bit of unpacking of the evolutionary process. But here's a great metaphor for evolution. You take 1,000 people, take 1 million people, and give them a copy of War and Peace. And you make them retype the book. And then you have a quality assurance team that's looking at all the recopies. And if the retyping has too many typos, those books just go to the shredder. That's called natural selection. The mutations, the typos were dysfunctional. So if they're too dysfunctional, they just go to the shredder. They don't go to the next generation. If the typos aren't so bad, they can go to the next generation. And if by some fluke, one of the typos improves on Leo Tolstoy's words, then that book goes through with preferential breeding. One book out of that 1 million. Now, I want you to think about how long it would take for that one modification to make its way to the entire population, considering it goes through with, just to the next generation as one thing. Like it goes through the next one, maybe it produces another 10 in the next one, and they produce 10 each in the next one. It's going to take thousands of generations for that genetic mutation to become real. Like it's going to take forever. We no longer have that kind of time. It would be thousands of generations. But on top of that, we've also all but eliminated natural selection. Everybody breeds. Everybody breeds. Like anybody who wants to have babies, pretty much they can go get I know there are some people who struggle with it. Don't get me wrong. I know there's a personal journey here, but compared to the old days, basically there's nothing preventing anyone from having children. And so what's going on is we no longer have natural selection. Most children make it. There used to be 80% infant mortality. Now there isn't. So evolution is not going to save us. Consciousness is. It's going to require consciousness. It's going to require a dedicated, individualized effort, and then a groupthink effort, and then heavy pressure on governments and corporations to make changes. I would say that one of the most powerful things that any of us could do is change what we buy. When you realize that one of the purest forms of democracy is capitalism, like it really is, it's been horrible to us in many ways. I'm a capitalist generally, but I believe that capitalism and the food industry has been disastrous for us. And capitalism and the pharmaceutical industry has been even more disastrous for us. That said, how do we turn it around? It's very simple. If you don't buy it, they won't make it.
Yeah. Right on. Oh, well, and similarly to that, the stopping buying it. I mean, this to me, the biggest food revolution in the health revolution is to become free of dependency on these big industries, and that requires us to take those conscious choices and educate ourselves in, listening to conversations like this, and try and cut through the noise. I mean, you simplified it so much in terms of looking at the kind of evolutionary profile of what our ancestors ate, and illustrated so powerfully how we haven't moved the dial based on that wonderful Tolstoy example that, human beings haven't fundamentally changed. I have one more question on the ancestral piece before I kind of move on to talk about, how people can take control of the diet and the work you've done with the WildFit way over, working with hundreds of thousands of people now, impacted, so many people in the world, and it helped them to improve the quality of their life and their health, their longevity. To what extent does your own physical lineage matter? So I'm born in the United Kingdom, down in Torbay in the southwest of England, probably with my hair color, may have some heritage in Scotland, maybe over in Scandinavia somewhere. Do these patterns change depending on where your evolutionary lineage lies? So if my ancestors were likely to have been born on the coast of Norway, does that make a difference versus, say, someone was born in the Dominican, where
yes and no. First of all, where you're born is, from a genetic perspective, where you're born is basically irrelevant. But the longer your ancestors spent time in any given region will have some impact on things. So, for example, you're absolutely right. You are likely from Northern Europe. If you look at me, I am likely from mid to Southern Europe, predominantly genetically speaking. Why? Well, because sunlight is so unbelievably important to human health that the further away from the equator you move, the lighter your skin becomes to allow greater sun exposure, to allow greater sun to pass through. And it's got antimicrobial impact on your body. It stimulates vitamin D. I mean, the sun is imperative to your health. So if you're moving north, say to Scotland or say to Norway over the space of many, many, many generations, then some of the children, as you start moving north, they're going to suffer for lack of sunlight and they're not going to make it. But some of them who just happen to have a slight mutation of slightly lighter skin, they're more likely to be successful. They're more likely to have children, and the light skin thing continues. And so the further north you went, the lighter your skin and hair and eyes would get in order to, create a better ability to absorb the sunlight. This doesn't just work going north either, by the way. It also moves south. The people who moved south from the equator, the only place we really can see that, though, is in southern Africa. But the people that were living in southern Africa before Europeans arrived were the Hottentots and the Khoisan. Those people were very, very light in color. In fact, they were so light in color that when apartheid ended in South Africa, the Khoisan Bushmen were not permitted to participate in wealth redistribution programs and property programs because they were too light. They were the original people from there. If anybody owns that country, it should have been them, right? But they were too light to participate. So in that sense, that would be, say, evolution. Evolution would be you come from a line of people that evolved optimal hair color, skin color, eye color for the level of sun exposure that you were dealing with, because there was tremendous selective pressure on you to do that. That means today that if you move somewhere that has a different level of sunlight than you evolved for, or you change your lifestyle so that you change your impact to sun, you're going to have consequence. If you were to move to the Dominican Republic, you would need to be more careful about the sun than somebody who lived in Eritrea, right? Like, equally though, if somebody from Eritrea or Nigeria were to move to Norway, they would have an entirely different set of consequences. They would not get enough sunlight. Their children would be very likely to develop rickets, and they would have a variety of other health implications from doing that. That's what we call the evolution gap. When you change your circumstances, or when modern civilization changes your circumstances faster than your evolution can keep up. Now, that said, from a food perspective, that's a much longer journey. The sun perspective had an immediate impact on us, but when humans broke out of Africa and they made their way into Southern Europe, what happened there is that they started exposing themselves to new plants that were, many of them, toxic and difficult for them to eat. But over time, they started developing the ability to eat those plants. And they also figured out agriculture eventually so that they could actually influence the development of edible plants and what have you. But animals, they didn't have that problem, because meat is meat. I mean, and animals defend themselves physically, not biochemically. Some do. I mean, squid and skunk and so forth. But the meat is basically unprotected nutritional resource. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Alaska or you're in Africa. If you're eating a buffalo, you're eating buffalo meat. So we were able to expand around the planet because the most important available food source to us was everywhere. If we had been herbivorous, we would never have been able to escape Africa. Not until we had full-scale agriculture. We would have needed full-scale agriculture. We would have needed to take the plants that we had an evolved relationship with, and we would have needed to travel with them and take them with us because we were dependent upon them. If you took, let's say, an African buffalo, and you took that buffalo and relocated it to America, you'd have some problems, because the grass, I mean, just so you understand the specificity here, that you've often seen in, nature programs, that the wildebeest and the zebra and the buffalo, they all herd together. What you might not know about that is that they have different diets. They look like they're all eating the same thing because they're all eating grass, but some of them eat the top of the grass, some of them eat the midsection of the grass, and some of them like to eat the base of the grass. So they need to herd together to make sure that each of their nutritional requirements are met. So that's how specific it is. So you think you could just take an African buffalo and stick it in America somewhere without considering the nutritional changes that are going to happen? It might be pretty difficult. It might be really difficult. On the other hand, if you took lions and released them into the Yellowstone National Park, they would have a field day, because they can eat elk and they can eat buffalo. They wouldn't be a problem for them at all, because they don't have the biochemical problem with plants.
Wow, that's fascinating. Fascinating. I want to transition now in the kind of final stage of the discussion to look at some practical takeaways for people. And I would like to use the WildFit process as a building block for that. And speaking of building blocks, I kind of understand the kind of Lego bricks that compose of what the WildFit method is all about, and how people can start to think about how they can modify their own approaches to be in greater alignment with their ancestral pathways. So I'd love to hear a bit more about, how you've structured your work to support people through these changes over time.
Yeah, sure. Let's start with this, that when I first turned my health around, I did it based on, research and food rules. I found some things out. I applied those rules. I got great results. My friends obviously started coming to me and going, wow, you look amazing. Like I changed so much that my mom couldn't recognize me when she first saw me. That's how much I changed. And so my friends would come to me and go, look, you look great. I how do I do it? And I would give them the rules, but it didn't work. Like they just wouldn't stick with it. Maybe they weren't in the same level of pain that I was in. Maybe they had a different, whatever it was, it didn't work. And so I kind of gave up on that. I gave up on coaching people on health because it was like they just didn't change. Remember, the consciousness around health back then was very, very different. I mean, if you tried to tell somebody back then that they should reconsider the relationship with milk, for example, they would basically threaten to have you locked up in an asylum because that was crazy. These days, people understand there are problems with milk. So, back then I kind of came to this place where I realized that it just wasn't going to work to write a book and give people a bunch of rules, because the vast majority of people can't follow the rules for more than a week or two anyway. So I then began a different journey, and the journey was to understand behavioral psychology, what establishes habits, what breaks them, what reestablishes them, what establishes new ones, and so on. And I took a different approach than, say, like, I love the book Atomic Habits. It's so very good. And in there's this big debate about how long does it take to create a habit. One study says 66 days. One study says 15 days, 21 days, whatever, right? I would argue that the premise is incorrect in the first place. The question is wrong. It's not a matter of how long it takes to create a habit. It's a matter of emotional intensity. With enough emotional intensity, a single event can change your behavior for the rest of your life. You don't need to do it for 66 days to lock it in. And so I started looking at things like that, and I discovered that to be very true around food, that there were things that you could do that would change people's relationship with food so they would not need to rely on willpower to change. If you still want ice cream, I don't care how much I tell you it's good for you or bad for you, whatever, you're going to eat it. One day you might give it up for a while, but if you still want it, you're going to eat it. What if I could get you to not want it? What if I could do that, is what I thought. And so I developed an educational system called behavioral change dynamics, which we first put into our business programs, and it was super effective. It meant that the programs were very sticky, that people would complete them. I mean, first of all, if you've got a program and they won't read the book or they won't complete the program, it's not going to work very well. But then the next one was that it was actually transformative, that it worked. And so a little over 10 years ago, I went into the studio and recorded our first WildFit program. I'd done some live coaching with people to test out the ideas. It was wildly successful. Like, we would have 8 people in a class and all 8 of them would transform, which was statistically very unlikely. So then I went into the studio and recorded the program. And it was basically, let me put it this way, 3 core pillars made it more effective than any sort of diet program that's ever been launched before. And that was nutritional anthropology. That was not new. The paleo diet had come along, and people were basically understanding that there were some truths in there, but we had some differences in nutritional anthropology, because mostly the paleo diet is focused on what to eat. And we knew there was another very key component, and that was when to eat. And so that was the next part that we brought, was metabolic reset. So long before keto was a thing, we were showing people how to get into ketosis and how to trigger cleansing in their body and so forth. And those 2 things together were phenomenally powerful. But the third piece is what really locked it in, and that was food psychology, helping people break the connections that they'd made between foods that the food industry had hypnotized them into, had hijacked their emotional states and their holidays and all that kind of stuff. We put those 3 things together, and it was outstanding. We would run classes with hundreds of people in them, and we get an 85% completion rate and a 90% success rate from self-reported from the clients.
Yes.
And I want to give you a tool. I want to give you one example so people can feel this tangibly in their body. If you do this one thing, you can change your entire life. Don't pay me a penny. Don't sign up for my program. Just do this one thing and you can change everything. We talked earlier, Dan, about reward systems and how we evolved our reward systems, right? So one thing that I don't think people fully understand about the reward system. Sometimes the reward system isn't simply there to reward you for doing something good, but it's also there to help you to lock in the pattern of behavior that created the result. So you and I went hunting, let's say 20,000 years ago. We tracked, we paid attention, we did all the right things. We smelled, we listened, we watched, and then we saw what we were hunting. We pulled back our bows the right amount. We notched it correctly. We felt for the wind. We let fly. Thunk. We hit the target, and we got a massive dopamine hit. We haven't even started eating yet. We got a massive dopamine hit. Our body is going, this is amazing. And by the way, the village is celebrating you, aren't they? You just got food for everybody. The other hunters are celebrating you. You're celebrating. The act of celebration causes your unconscious to look back at the, say, 24 hours before this incredible event and say, how did I create this magic? So it can lock those behaviors in for the rest of your life. You have a rookie sports guy playing in the FIFA World Cup, and he gets put on in the final minutes of the game and he scores the winning goal, right? Well, he's going to be celebrated. He's going to celebrate. The town is going to celebrate. This country's going to celebrate. It's going to be amazing. And then his body's going to look back and go, holy crap, what did I do to create this magic? It's not just going to be about how he kicked. It's going to be about what he had for breakfast. Tell me that's not going to become his game day breakfast for the rest of his life. Tell me that when he knocked his head on the cupboard when he was tying his shoes and he kind of hurt himself a little, that he doesn't do a superstitious bump of his head on the locker before game day for the rest of his life. And so when you really understand that that's how this works, consider this. You've had a rough day. It was tough. Some things didn't go your way. You lost your cool. You feel a bit shitty. You go home and it's time for a glass of wine or a beer or an ice cream or a donut or a cookie or a bowl of cereal or whatever it is that people crutch on because there's so many things. And you eat that thing and your body gets this phenomenal caloric payoff and it produces a celebratory burst of dopamine and serotonin. And then your body starts asking, how on earth did I create this magic? I created this magic by having a shitty day, by being unproductive, by losing my cool, by being sad and depressed. And your body learns from that the path to the ice cream is to trigger sadness and depression in your body.
Wow.
So we call this reward repatterning, where you begin to realize, look, I'm not saying don't eat chocolate. I'm not saying don't eat ice cream. I'm not saying don't have a glass of wine. I mean, life is for the living. What I'm saying is, from this day forward, only ever have those things in celebration of greatness. That's it. You scored the winning goal, have an ice cream. You got the project done at work, have an ice cream. You won a big sale, you got a promotion, you started a new business and it kicked ass, have an ice cream. Celebrate your greatness and your body will go, what magic created this bowl of ice cream? Oh, I got my to-do list done today. I was happy today. I was happy. I was cheerful with everybody I spoke with. I was the best version of me today. And your body will then realize that the only way to get to those calories is by being the best version of you. Reward repatterning can be one of the most significant life changes anybody could make to their lives. And this is just one of the psychological principles that we support people through in our WildFit programs.
Incredible. Yeah. I mean, I know several of our members have been through the program and have spoke incredible. You had some incredible results, life-changing results. And we'll put the link in the description for everyone. And you'll be able to find out how to hear about the latest intake and Eric's books that are coming up, that, becoming prolific in this area, writing about these different issues, and a great book out on diabetes for anyone who's suffered with diabetes. Do check that out as well. We didn't have a chance to talk about that in depth today, but Derek's got some amazing work on that will really transform the way you look at diabetes. So please also look at that. We don't have time, and we didn't get to go into it, but I would have loved to have heard what you think about lab-grown meat, fake dairy, synthetic foods. I think the answer will be
no.
That's a quick fire answer for you. I will close with a closing question. As we were talking about advertising as a primer, if you had 3 billboards, you talked about the rules, and you've illustrated how important the psychology is. Imagine you had 3 billboards that were to program people these important rules. What 3 rules would you have on those billboards to help people think differently about their food?
Ask this question before every meal. Is this going to build me or clog me?
Awesome.
Then ask this question before every bite. Will this food satisfy my hunger or will it make me hungry? If you're eating foods that make you hungry, like heavy carbs, and by the way, I'm not against eating carbs. I'm just saying eat them consciously. But if you're eating a food that you know triggers hunger, you got to think about that. And then another one would be, whose decision was this? and I, just to quantify that a little bit or to explain a little bit, Dan, there are people today that tell me I can't celebrate Easter without chocolate. Well, I'll tell you what, Jesus did. There was no chocolate. How the hell did chocolate become the figurehead of Easter? And how did candy canes become? There were no candy canes in Bethlehem. They have hijacked our emotions. They've hijacked our food guides. They've hijacked our holidays. And so whose decision was this?
Very powerful, and a great rally call to take the power back, which is what this episode is about. So, Eric, it's amazing to be with you again. We'll link up Eric's WildFit program in the description, so have a look at that wherever you're watching, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Rumble, Odyssey, it doesn't matter. You'll find the link below. We'll include links to Eric's books as well. So it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Eric. Thank you so much for being with us on the Dan Astin-Gregory Podcast, and really appreciate the work you're doing in the world of the WildFit way, and look forward to seeing what comes next for you.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to talk with Eric. He doesn't just talk about health, he lives it. And he's given us a serious wake-up call to take back control of something we often overlook, which is our relationship with food. Personally, I'm inspired to experiment more deeply with fasting and how to become more conscious of how I eat, not just what I eat. But what about you? What changes are you going to make after hearing this episode today? Drop us a comment to let us know. And if you're ready to take the next step, head to danastingregory.com/wildfit to explore the WildFit food freedom experience and see if it's right for you. And before you go, if this episode sparked deeper questions about the world around us, then join us for the Thinking Society webinar taking place on May the 15th. It's completely free and it's designed to help you to build the confidence to navigate a world full of manipulation and noise. The full 6-week course then begins on May the 22nd. If you're ready to go deeper, sign up now at weareelevate.org/Thinking Society. And as always, live free and prosper. See you again very soon.